All right, a very warm welcome for those that are just joining us. It's the Kickstarter segment of Morning at NTV. And for those that are still with us and went with us into the break, it's always a pleasure to have you on board. Welcome. We're going to be speaking about accountable politics in Africa. We're also going to touch on what are the key issues and what will happen in the future and how the youth are positioning themselves for that. We'll also touch on youth leadership excellence in politics. All this comes on the backdrop of the fact that questions are being asked not only in Uganda but across the African continent. Where are the youth? And when they do come into the political space or landscape, how effective are they in running matters on their own? I'll be introducing my very youthful guests this morning, but first, let's go through our preamble. Our global space is dominated by growing social and online processes and tools for which the youth have higher and better levels of competence than older generation, and it's evident that in many countries this has created the space for them to participate, and it's achieving levels of innovation and technological development. Through their networks and application of information, as well as the emerging technologies, the youth can play a significant role in transforming the continent. With half of the world's population aged under 30, the survival and the flourishing of democracy is highly dependent on their engagement in the political landscape. On set this morning, I'm joined by Richard Bad Byamukama, a security and strategic studies master's student at Nkumba. He's a very youthful, seasoned commentator. Many thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Chris. Good morning, viewers. Let's share together today.
We also have Ezra Rashande, a lawyer and former Speaker of the National Youth Parliament. It's always a pleasure to have you on board.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning, viewers. It's a pleasure to be
And
here. My
extreme left is Moses Kidega, Secretary of the National Youth Council. Many thanks.
Thank you, Chris, and to the viewers, a lovely morning, and I'm happy to be here.
Great. Let me stay with you because you hold a very pivotal position as far as youth engagement within the political economic space is concerned in Uganda. There are questions that are emerging, and this is down to the fact that there is a wave across the continent that sees youth agitating for greater attention to the matters that affect them. From the government, from the leaders. We saw what happened in Kenya. We've seen a few protests and how things played out in Uganda. We've seen in Nigeria something that has grown and has been swelling. Does this speak to a new dispensation when it comes to youth engagement in matters political, social, and economic?
Thank you thank you very much, Chris. I think important to note is that the youth have never been a dominant force in Africa. And we want to go back to the struggle of Africa's independence. That at the forefront of this particular struggle was a youthful group of people. Here in Uganda, at the verge of our independence, at the climax of that struggle were fairly young people. The Prime Minister then, Obote, was I think around 31 years of age. If you look at the independence struggles across Africa, you go to South Africa, the likes of Stephen Bantu Mbiko and the likes of Walter Sisulu then were fairly young people. So the issues of Africa have always, from time immemorial, been led by young people. Now, what has defined is probably the context that we operate in today, is that today the young people are finding themselves in a state where their governments have become sort of neo-colonial headmasters, that they are grossly involved in corruption. They are, they are at the forefront of mismanaging public affairs. And the young people who are the biggest both beneficiaries and also victims of either a good or bad government are saying that, no, look here, there are some issues that we must begin to talk about. And issues such as corruption, issues such as public affairs must be dealt with in a way that we appreciate. So when you see them coming up in big numbers in Kenya, in Bangladesh, and saying that enough is enough, there is a genuine concern. And this concern, I think we must take it back because there's a continental context to this conversation, which is the prospective future of Africa. And to appreciate that, we must juxtapose the questions to the 1963 consensus in Addis Ababa, when the African leaders met then, convened by President Haile Selassie of Ethiopia. There are things that they agreed upon. And the things agreed upon were codified later on in the 1963 African Union Charter. And to me, there are key elements that I would love to point out in that consensus. One is that the leaders agreed on the aspect of sovereignty of Africa. Two was on the aspect of peace and security. And the third and most important perhaps is how do we harness Africa's resources to spur real economic development. And the resources, in my view, are twofold. One is in terms of its population. You've already given us a very good preamble, and I'd just love to emphasize it again, is that 70% of Africa's population is below the age of 35 years old. In fact, more than that. More than that, so yeah. That population, with its resilience, with its hard work, with its potential, if put to a productive venture, if a government creates an enabling environment for them to access quality education, for them to have the proper access to health, then they can be the engine and the architect for Africa's development. But also in terms of resources, it's important to note that Africa is home to over 30% of the world's natural minerals. It is home to over 12% of the world's natural gas. But you look at the security and the foundation architecture and the framework of Africa is that insecurity does not allow the resources in DRC to get out of the ground for it to be used for proper transformative purposes. Is that, if you know, is that there is a dam that if constructed in Congo, and that's the Igma Dam, it has capacity to generate power for the entire sub-Saharan Africa. But Congo, more so the eastern part of Congo, finds itself in endless conflict. Conflict that is both orchestrated internally, but also with foreign influence at the center of it. So you can see that the aspirations of the continent are very clear, but the same aspirations are undermined by both internal and external factors. The internal being that our leaders, because of their greed for power, because of their world views about how to run a government, is that they have found themselves highly indebted. All right, they've auctioned the continent they've auctioned the continent to the Western powers. All right, and this is through debt. Is that you have a government that has continuously incurred debt, and the continent is up for auction. All right, if you saw, I think it was in Zimbabwe, whereby the building that houses the parliament of Zimbabwe is up for auction by the government of China. So very deplorable. That is the predicament that we find ourselves in. But we can get out of it through a strategic framework also. All right. I do hope by the end of the program that kind of framework will be pretty open to many of the youth that are out there to understand exactly how that can be achieved. But let me come to Mr. Rwashande. Mr. Kidega spoke about context, and I love the way he juxtaposed the leaders of 1963 or the 1960s to the youth today. They are no doubt the older persons right now, but when it comes to context, what is missing today that was apparent in the 1960s that occasioned the kind of thought processes on the youth of that time, the young people of that time, to act the way they did or to be as aggressive as they were, that is not happening today?
Thank you very much, Chris. And I would like to first state it clear that youth, it is not a phase. It is a revolution that is awaiting to happen. Okay. And we have seen, like he stated, my colleague Chidega, that he gave us the history. We all know the history of Africa, as all African countries stood up and said no to colonialism, and they fought for their independence. And we had young people like the Kwame Nkrumah, like the Milton Obote, Jomo Kenyatta, and Julius Nyerere of Tanzania. These are youth who came and said no to colonialism. They are not special, or they have not studied anything that is bigger than the youth of today. But what matters is after we had gained independence and the leadership that took over, how has it shaped its youth? And how has it shaped its governance? Has the governance of the current governance give enough space for the youth to participate in the real politics, even though they have not given them enough space to participate in politics? We have seen youth coming up, doing the activities in a small space. They have been created,
afforded,
and afforded to put across. So to me, I find that I cannot undermine the efforts of youth, because we see, like I stated, it is a revolution that is awaiting.
That's right.
And these people that came in 1965, there was another phase where we saw the old people were still squeezing. So it is a matter of time to see these young people coming up and taking over.
Okay.
So and it is coming. We have seen it. We have seen it in Kenya. We have youth have come up and said no to this. We have seen it here in Uganda. It happened just of recent, and I cannot undermine any effort where the youth have stood up and said no to a particular policy or to a particular any way of undermining their spaces and how they should be participating in particular, they should be participating in politics and civic and their civic rights.
Okay, there is of course so much to chew on when it comes to the nature of intervention that the youth do. But Byamukama, Kidega spoke about what appears to be structural dysfunction, where systems are put in place to systematically ensure that the youth do not achieve their full potential. When you look at the various conferences and the speaking and engagements that happened between, or rather among, the youth leaders in the 1960s, they are not happening today, or if they are happening, then they are not being propped as well as the other ones were, for us to be able to see a clear trajectory of action that is being undertaken by the youth today. When there are a few protests here and there, somebody might see that something is going on. But the real work usually goes on behind the scenes, especially when it comes to awareness in the civic spaces, but also arming the youth with the kind of mindset that they actually can and should be able to come to the forefront. Is it the missing link today that was readily available in the 1940s, 50s,
you see,
and 60s?
Chris and our dear viewers, a revolutionary age is an age of action. So ours is an age of publicity and advertisement. So nothing ever happens, but there is immediate publicity everywhere. So we live in, you see, every day we should be worried, and we are worried. That's why we wake up every day to go to work, because we are worried about the future of either ourselves, our children, or our grandkids. So we wake up every day to go and work, because human beings are fallible. They grow old, they retire, or they die. So it should be an agenda or top on the protocol that these young people, what is their future like? So we live in a borderless world where the world is so close to each other. So information sharing is very immediate. So the use of today, that's why I told you it is not yet a revolutionary age. Many thanks to social media and mainstream media for disseminating information to the young people. But the young people are seemingly still adamant to restructure the structured architecture of governance in Africa, because simply, you see, most regimes in Africa tend to adopt patronage policies that you know where institutions are characterized by patronage and you know cadderships. Most presidents in Africa, there's a book called It's Our Time to Eat. It was written by a Kenyan writer called Ngogo wa Thiong'o. So when regimes change in Africa, each regime comes with its own segment to occupy the various positions of power and you know share the root. So that has been the trend in Africa. So when it comes to regimes that have taken a longer spell in power in Africa, so it becomes absolute. Systems become dysfunctional, and you know there is nothing that goes on the ground. That's why you see most regimes that have taken a longer space, a longer political space in Africa, adapt you know those absolute policies of you know state surveillance, brutality, and all those elements, because they have to maintain these youths because of the dysfunctional policies and you know institutions. So you have to instigate those ruthless policies against these young people, you know, to instill fear, so that these young people do not involve themselves in
politics.
Revolutionary. Yeah.
That means there is a deliberate and a very well orchestrated a program to disempower the youth. Do we as young people, I was going to say youth, I'm not a youth, do we as young people understand this mission to disempower?
You see,
just a moment, what are the layers of action that youth are involved in? That is at the local levels in terms of leadership and taking up these positions and ensuring that they are making the decisions. Are we seeing something deliberate, or it's spontaneous that, okay, somebody has come up, one youth appears, and all of a sudden, because there's a hype to it, there is a tendency to think that all the youth are there, when actually it's a single person? Let me just pose that question to Mr. Kidega. Yeah. Do we have existent layers, political, economic, and social, where the youth and the young people are preparing themselves for positions of leadership? Yeah. Or are we seeing tokenism taking root and misleading us to think that actually the youth are there?
All right, fair enough. Your question introduces two aspects, whether our participation is about form or substance. I think in terms of form, the structures exist. Like you have the National Youth Council, you have UNSA, you have the National Youth Parliament, and all these several institutions. But in terms of the substance of that participation, it is still lacking to a great extent. And this goes back to, I think, if I may use the incident of the Arab Spring, that you had young people who mobilized well but forgot to organize, is that at the inception of the Arab Spring, it was a largely youth movement.
That's right.
And the government of Hosni Mubarak fell down in Egypt on the voices of young people. But guess what? When he fell down, the person who took over was another old guard. So it means that the young people mobilized, they made all the noise, they went to the streets, but they forgot to organize themselves strategically. So I think this goes back to how we organize ourselves. Because it is comfortable for us to point a finger and say, there is a deliberate or intentional attempt to keep us disempowered, to keep us maybe to inhibit our participation in terms of governance. But also, before we ask of what the country has done for us, what have we done for ourselves, I think that question must linger
in... speak like Kennedy.
That question must linger in our minds continuously, because for as long as we sit back and and expect that things will be done for us, that is not going to happen. Because the people who are holding power now are not comfortable with us organizing ourselves, because when we organize ourselves, then we pose a threat to their political stay in power.
That's right.
But also, the systems that could have been created either intentionally or subconsciously that have limited youth participation in politics could be several, and one of which that I have to point out is the monetization of the politics in Africa in general. Is that for you to run an election in Africa, let's break it down to Uganda, is that you need, I saw a report by the financial intelligence, something like that, that indicated that for you to win a position as a member of parliament, you need close to 600 million Uganda shillings. Now, where is the young person going to get that money from? It is not there, all right? In the UK, Boris Johnson resigned as Minister of Education under the Cameroon government because he was being paid more money as a private citizen because he was writing in a column called the Spectator. And his column in the newspaper was earning him way much money than being Minister of Education in a government. But here in Africa, governance has become a profitable venture. That for you to be in government, you are going to become filthy rich within a short period of time. Now, when you go to government, is that you will have the wrong people taking up those places. People who are there for the profitability and not for the service of the people, right? And of course, there has been an intentional design to ensure that African governments are very profitable. And Dambisa Moyo makes this argument very clearly in her book, Dead Aid, where she says that, you know, the more you have grants and donations coming into Africa, the more you have access to all these loan facilities that have at times stringent but at times loose conditions, is that you make government a very attractive entity. And that is why he mentioned that you have one government coming and fighting the other, because every group will try to fight to benefit from that thing called governance, that you'll have a group going to the bush and fighting and toppling a government, even when the Hans Kelsen theory legitimizes revolutionary coups, is that you have groups fighting to be part of this profitable venture called a government. So we must begin to decommercialize our politics. Governance must be made less profitable. Here in Uganda, MPs determine how much they earn. And that's a huge problem. That's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. Right. So I think we must begin to strategically disembark some of these bottlenecks that are hindering our participation in politics, but also must our participation only be in elected politics? No way. A great question there, and it's something that we are going to transition into a little bit later, how the youth are keeping themselves active in the economic and business spaces for them to be able to cultivate the necessary capital and the productivity that is needed to drive economic transformation. But Mr. Rashande, you're a former Speaker of the National Youth Parliament. I don't want to put you on the spot for your tenure while you were the Speaker, but I just want you to give us the state of affairs when it comes to organizations that are meant to drive the youth agenda and offer much needed direction, especially when it comes to how and what the youth are up to. Do you see a clear-cut process happening now that you're a former Speaker, you're out of that frame, you can look at the picture more independently? With hindsight now.
Definitely. There is no clear cut for the youth. There has been a clear and intentional disempowerment of young people, because the leadership that is the leadership of the current leadership clearly knows that the moment you allow youth to come together and mobilize themselves, then definitely the government will not stay there for long. So there is clear disempowering youth through their small groups of mobilization, through even in the way of financial status, even in the way of social groups that they have. It is clear. And another thing, the laws that have been made by the parliament. When you look at the laws that have been made by the parliament, we have the biggest number of young people in this country. But when you see the representation that is in parliament, that one gives you a clear picture that the youth are disempowered. We have almost, is it like 5 members of parliament that are representing youth
at regional levels?
At the regional levels.
But again, youth are allowed to contest for positions, including mainstream members of parliament, and many of them have come through.
We are not looking at because everyone can participate. We are looking at particularly youth. Is youth considered are youth considered as a priority in this country to come into leadership? Definitely no. We have seen the National Youth Council, where they're in the process of merging National Youth Council. The budget is always cut every day. That shows that there is disempowerment of young people to participate in politics.
Gentlemen, I'm afraid I'm going to have to go for a break, but when we return, this conversation will continue, and Mr. Byamukama, I'll be coming straight to you to use your good offices in terms of strategic studies on how exactly the youth in the country can begin to form and, like Mr. Kidega said, organize and not only mobilize. You're watching Morning at NTV. It's the Kickstarter, and we are trying to understand where the youth are, where they can be, and what they ought to do in order to shape the future for Uganda and indeed Africa. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm glad you're still with us. You're watching Morning at NTV, and it's the Kickstarter. We are discussing politics in Africa and what the youth can do, ought to do, in order to shape the future and be agents of the socio-economic transformation that many are agitating for. Allow me go straight to Mr. Richard Byamukama. You are a security and strategic studies master student, a very young one at that, no doubt. These days it's okay to study and be able to wipe out all the books, but that should be able to offer you much needed ability to sieve and offer perspective to any one person there, especially the young ones that are listening and watching. Let me ask the question. I don't know whether to phrase it as betrayal or not. That is entirely upon you. We have youth leaders who have transitioned into young leaders and getting into positions of power or within the corridors of power themselves. They understand the very issues they were fighting against, the very concerns that they thought were hindering their development, ability to participate, and their peers. And now here they are. They've either become members of parliament, they've become leaders of opposition, they've become whatever they've become. And they seem to begin to adopt a method that again disempowers the people who thought were going to be helped by their ascendancy to those positions.
You see, Chris, in patronage regimes, under patronage, there is no institution that will function the way it is supposed to function. So that occurs where governments introduce patronage systems of administration, you know, where every system is held under captivity. So the moment institutions are under captivity, you don't expect a lot from them. So, Chris, as Edward Snowden writes in his book Permanent Record, the population should not be, you know, should not be terrified about the government. It should be the government to be terrified about.
That is the ideal situation.
Yes, yes. So when you find a population that is terrified of its own government, then that is not democracy or governance. That's terror. So that's terror and operation against the citizens. So most of the population, the youthful population in Africa, live under such circumstances where government exert excess all the energy on, you know, suppressing their voices, you know, having them not being heard. That's why you have seen in Africa most of those authoritative regimes have been overthrown in military coups. So there are instances where military coups are the only remaining options to give justice to the population, to the youthful population. You saw what happened in Gabon. The Omar Bongo was encouraging these young people to go on streets and shout, you know, but they went to streets to celebrate, to jubilate. So you saw Mamad Doumbouya in Guinea, when Alpha Conde was paraded on streets in a vest. So these are useful people, young people, who have overthrown regimes that have been autocratic, not granting those elements of, you know, universal participation, agitation, and, you know, policy changes. So we, as you know, as young people, young people should not give up. They shouldn't, because you see, the moment agitation is also another tool of, encouraging or attracting the change that this world deserves. So the moment all people are quiet and silent about what is going on, so we shall end up in a situation, in a very dire situation. We have economies that are non-existent, according to John Perkins in Confessions of an Economic Hitman. All those figures that you read in the budgets, these are non-existent figures. Per capita income. Yes, if you read John Perkins in Confessions of an Economic Hitman, so all the economies of Africa, most of them were mortgaged to those money lenders and the rest. So they just create those figures, GDP, to inflated GDPs and per capita incomes to just show the world that their nations are doing well. But in the de fact, most people continue to shrink into absolute poverty. So institutions, patronage in Africa is the main cause of why institutions, and all over, because this man, Darren Achmugu, writes about it. So whenever the institutions are under patronage, there is no institution that will function. There will not be, there will be no accountability. Corruption and cryptocurrency will be the order of the day. You have seen young people here in Uganda demonstrate over corruption, but nothing has ever been done. So they are waiting for these young people to again resume online campaigns and online mobilizations against the regime, or physical demonstrations against the regime, in order to react with that brute force. You see, Chris, when people are quiet, because the army, the police, and the intelligence are everywhere, that is also not security. That's terror also. So we shouldn't wait for these young people to riot or to go on streets or to instigate coups. Because they are young people.
What should we do?
Yes, we should, as the governments in Africa should introduce policies. Let these institutions function.
Okay.
Yes, when we have a direct function that is up to their tasks, then there will be universal participation of everybody. The institutions will be present. There will be service delivery, and most of these young people will be empowered in production and productive ventures. So you won't see any young people in a dire situation or lamenting over anything.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Rashande, the reality is what Mr. Bebakama says. No one is going to allow for the youth to take up spaces that they want, because it kind of threatens their own positions. And that leaves the question, in light of the fact that no one wants you to get there, what must you do? Are you going to resign to the fate and wait for them to be, at a moment they will either get bored at leadership? Mustn't there be concerted effort? And this is what I want clarity on. In light of the fact that the young people have understood what the old want for them, how do you move forward? No one is going to say, hold your hand, Mr. Rashande, here we are, we need a new Attorney General. But you're a young lawyer, and being an Attorney General is something that we can benefit from as a young population. But that is not the reality. No one is looking at that. How do we move as young people, and mostly youth?
You see, Chris, the way you have formed your questions, if you have been, my discussions with you always, today have been, my words have been limited, just because the way the questions are formed, it's like the youth have failed in Africa. And totally, I disagree with that.
I'm not a cynic, by the way.
Yes, I'm
not a cynic.
Yes,
I'm one who is as realist as they come.
Yes,
Chris is right to trigger that thought.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is my job as a moderator.
But I believe that the discussion should be open and say what is the steps that youth, what is the youth cookie? Exactly.
That's what I just asked.
What is that?
What are the strategies
what I'm
available to
saying,
us?
what I would like to assure you that I would like to assure we cannot undermine. We cannot undermine the potential of the youth. Okay. We cannot undermine the actions the youth have taken so far.
That's right.
Rome was not built in one day. We have seen all over Africa. Even we have seen young presidents who have come up just in few years.
Ezra,
wait,
he told you in Egypt they had a revolution that was led by young people, but the president who turned out was Muhammad Morsi, 60 years plus. So we have had revolutions in Africa led by young people, but in the end, in Sudan. So it was led by young people, but the president. Yes.
You see, let him submit.
You see what you're looking at. You're looking at who comes out. You understand? But we are looking at who has brought up the change. Who has fought for the change? The change has been brought by the young people. They have generated it, and now it is there. There is change of government. And the fact there is change of government, they expect clear leadership, good policies. And in case that president doesn't come up, or doesn't come up with a good ideas, the young people expect from him, still they will take over. So I cannot undermine the potential of the youth.
Have we seen?
And we must have the courage.
Allow me keep it there.
We must have the courage to change the old ideas. The old ideas, and we come with new practices that the young people at this level have. Which are new practices? I've heard my fellow discussants saying that we are not revolutionists, that we are on social media. Social media is one way now in the whole world.
Revolutionary tool.
Exactly. You can do. I think you people, we did that last month here in Uganda. Kenya, they did that here in Uganda. You may think it was not
no. I'm not in any way trying to undermine.
No, I'm not saying it's you who is undermining. But I'm just discussing.
Let me just bring you this perspective.
Because I've had other discussions outside. We have discussions with people. Some say exactly with Ugandans.
And people, liberal enough.
Yes, and people are saying that maybe it was not successful. Whatever youth did, the deployment that took place and whatever happened, it was a success to young people.
Let me give you this adage. Let me just put it into perspective. The case of a hunter. You've gone to the forest, to the bush, and you've come up with sizable bushmeat. And then on your way home, there is a guy who understands that you're a very good shooter and you come up with very good bushmeat. And for him, he has made it his point to simply stage somewhere and then grab that, or condition you to give him a piece of what you've done. It means your effort, your dividends that you have worked for are not achieved as and how you might want it. You could have gone to the bush knowing that my homestead has 7 people. And this is sizable bushmeat for them. If a guy out there consistently does that to you when you're holding on to that, it means you're not serving your 7 people in the household, you're reaching with bushmeat that can only serve 2 or 3. That is the youth dilemma right now, that you can engage and put pressure on certain changes, but when it comes to the actual dividends, then the youth are nowhere. The big people come back, the older persons come back, just like it happened in Egypt.
Like I said.
So in light of that reality that the youth find themselves in Kenya, the Gen Zs did a wonderful job, but we've seen over the last 3 weeks, the kind of legislation that is again being brought back is an imitation of the finance bill that was controversial.
Look at how the cabinet was restructured.
The restructuring alone of the cabinet.
It has brought in the ODM old guard. What has changed?
So what we are saying is, how can the youth hold on to these advantages and be able to use them to condition the kind of change? Because what is needed right now is not for the youth to act and cause some changes. They need to be part of the change, to make the decisions.
Well, of course, the system has said that for them, they are going to prepare future for the youth, which is wrong. Instead, they should be preparing
The youth for the
You speak like you believe the older people that they are working for the youth.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's what they are doing. That's the theory and the phenomenon that is that is in. We have seen the campaigning, not just the campaign. That's securing the what? The future. And the future,
here,
yes, that's slogan. Yeah. For the what? Definitely for the Bazukulu. And it means,
Israel's choice to use the word Bazukulu only confirms what you're saying.
Yes,
that you have been patronized because I mean, who is a Bazukulu? This is a grandchild who should have no voice.
Yes. So respect the elder.
Yes.
Even when the elder is wayward, you know.
Yeah, so I think these are some of the things that we must begin to.
I think, which they should, the governments should prepare youth. Should not prepare youth for the future, but they should empower them for the future. You understand?
Okay.
Now, what we have seen, of course, we have seen now the government. In fact, this the marching and the protests that have been taking place. We see things a bit of changing, and the way they are changing, we are seeing the governments coming up with different ideas for the youth. We have seen where they are bringing in training facilities for young people who are not educated, and even putting in. Bring up Myoga, I'm talking here in Uganda, and in Kenya. You have also seen Ruto is doing the same, making sure that they engage the young people, put something for them.
That is now
exactly.
It's well understood. I appreciate where you're coming from.
And that is the protests, and that is the fight the youth have put. If they kept sleeping, this wouldn't
happen.
Exactly.
All right, Kidega.
Yeah.
I know the political stage is one that the youth can engage in and drive so much, because the politics conditions the economics. But we all know that it's actually the economics that does define the politics of the day. When you look at the nature of engagement in economic activity among the youth, we do believe that if there was sufficient productivity levels and the youth were engaged in them, then maybe they would have the leverage to begin to turn the arc towards the direction that they want. But again, if we are to contextualize this for Uganda's case, we find youth not aggressive enough to go into economic spaces in order to empower themselves before the government does bring forth those empowerment programs. What can change about the African youth when it comes to taking up productivity ventures?
Thank you. I'm going to use an Acholi adage to just describe something small.
Okay.
Is that in Acholi we have two traditional dances. One is the bola dance that is danced each time there is a guest coming into the community, like a big guest, maybe a president or something.
That's right.
You welcome them with the bola dance. There is something called the dingy dingy dance. Now that one is danced mainly in times of courtship, when maybe someone is getting married, we dance the ding ding. Now, youth in Africa are dancing the ding ding. They are dancing for the small things. They're dancing for courtships, but each time there is a guest coming into the home, it is the old people who go out to dance the bola dance. But you've asked a fundamental question, which is in terms of the economics, and this is where we all should be thinking. But you see, even the economics itself has not worked because the government is not doing enough to create an enabling environment. The youth don't need handouts. The youth don't need a myoga money. The youth don't need this money that you're giving them as a form of handout, which research has shown that this money is more often than not misused. What the youth need and the people need in Africa and in Uganda is what Singapore did under I forget the name of their prime minister then.
Lee Kuan Yew.
Yes, Lee Kuan Yew. Is that you have to empower the small, medium enterprises. Create an environment where they can have access to soft credit, all right? Where they can have access to available and ready market, all right? Create an infrastructure. In Uganda, we produce electricity, but the cost of electricity for production is way higher than it costs in Rwanda, where we export electricity itself. All right, so you can see that the cost of production in Africa or in Uganda is just too high. My mother who grows potatoes in the village, for her to transport her potatoes from wherever it is to Kampala, the roads that you'll have to use, the car that you'll use is going to break down numerous times because of the nature of the road infrastructure. So that shows that the government has not done enough to create an environment that enables businesses to thrive. Because when we talk about unemployment rising at a rate of 9% per annum, it is because the private sector is defunct. The public service is not going to absorb all of us. There can only be one attorney general, but there can be multiple law firms operating. All right. So we must be able to rethink Africa's economic model. As it stands today, it is outward looking. There is this facade about trying to attract foreign direct investors who have come here and are competing with our friends in Chikubo. All right. You can imagine a foreign investor hawking. You have foreign investors who are like, I would say,
a tax exemption of billions.
Yes, and but they're competing with the local indigenous system, the local indigenous producer who government should be protecting from competition. But instead, our local entrepreneurs are exposed to direct competition. Let me tell you something.
Yeah, quickly.
The business players in China get money at almost 0% interest. All right, so they have access to all that credit. They come here, invest it, and the capital flight is massive.
All right,
we cannot grow the economy like that. We must be able to be inward looking, support the domestic players, give them the environment that enables them to thrive.
Okay, Mr. Kidega takes us into another break. When we return, this conversation will continue. Stay with us. All right, welcome back. We're glad you're still with us. We are discussing accountable politics in Africa and what the youth have as a stake in it. Can they be the catalyst to the socio-economic transformation that is much sought after, not only by them, but also the older generation? In studio, I have with me Richard Byamukama. He's a security and strategic studies master's student at Nkumba. I also have Ezra Rashande, a lawyer and former speaker of the National Youth Parliament, as well as the secretary of the National Youth Council, Moses Kidega. Gentlemen, when we went into the break, the discussion had transitioned from the political space to the economy and how youth can use whatever leverage is available on the productivity end to be able to condition the kind of empowerment and change that we want for in our political space. Mr. Byabakama, is this even possible? Is it possible, or, as we had a discussion behind the scenes before we came back on air, it would be completely disempowering ourselves by doing what we seek to disentangle?
Without transparency, there is nothing that can thrive. Even if you talk about economics, even if
this man carries a load of pessimism. You don't know how to work around it.
It's not hopeful at all.
In African states where there is no transparency, there's nothing that can thrive. Even if you talk about agriculture, the monies will be ferried before they reach in Kagadi. Yes, so what we have to talk about is having mechanisms to foster transparency in governance in Africa here. So look, what young people have been saying is that when you have regimes that are accountable to their citizens, you'll have all this happen. You'll have a transparent flow of governance, of social services, of the economy, the fiscal policies will be fair, and all that stuff. So look, when these young people are demonstrating most recently, their main issues on the agenda were transparency issues. We are seeing lots of money being siphoned over and over. So in Nigeria, after the death of Sani Abacha in 1998, General Absalom Abaka instituted a commission to investigate into the tenure of Sani Abacha. So yes, billions of money of Nigerian nairas were discovered to have been looted and packaged with the Swiss banks. So then the repatriation mechanisms were put in place, and these billions have been recovered up to date. So that's why at times we think these financial or criminal sanctions are necessary by these Western powers, because by the time we have these sanctions, it means that the regimes in Africa have failed to to work on the issue of accountability, because
African solutions,
yes,
African problems. Why are you opening the doors for people to come and help us?
Look, these are your main funders, so you have to be accountable to their resources. Yes, they fund your governance, so you have to offer accountability. And most most of these elements of non-accountability, or affect human rights. They disentail the population again of their human rights. So these agencies, international agencies, just come in to protect human rights. So it is a thought that we at times
I have a feeling, Mr. Wamukama, you're writing a paper that seeks to establish the problem of Africa and the problem of the rest. I'm just thinking, I don't know.
Not at all. But you see, what we are talking about, these are the ideal problems that Africa is facing today. Because
how do we make our way?
Exactly, that is where I want us to go.
You see, that's where are the solutions? You've so sufficiently demonstrated to us the problem.
Yes.
But we need to understand, within your space as a young person, where are the likely solutions? Do we have any low-hanging fruits that we can say, okay, if the government does not appear to want the youth into their space, what are the youth going to do? What are the available options? Protest is one of them. We've tried here in Uganda. We've seen it in Kenya. The internet has done a lot in terms of ability to galvanize and put people into one, army. But we see it kind of dissolve so quickly, and then
Chris,
we wonder what next.
If these challenges are not addressed, we are just creating a more radical use that will destroy everything, because they can't dissolve all this thing by osmosis. They will have that element of radical or extreme. We are just grooming extremism, because we have elements like, for the case of Uganda, we are starting to see elements of inclusion, because the youth have been participatory in the governance and administration of Uganda, but they have not been inclusive. They have not been included. We are seeing elements. We are seeing the Nyamutoros coming. These are young people, but at a lesser space. So
tokenism, so to speak.
No, not at all. I won't talk about that. But in a non-transparent system, you expect that. Because
all right, what you're suggesting, Mr. Wamukama, is that let's discuss our solutions another time, after we've dealt
I'm not calling
after
for
we have dealt with these problems of transparency and the ability for people to account.
If we address transparency and all those issues, accountability, all these challenges will be addressed. The young people, you see, you are seeing what is happening to PDM in Uganda here. So things start from the top.
Let me have Mr. Rashande and then submit on what is itching, and then Mr. Kidega will come on.
You see, Chris, older men, they declare war. And it's young people or the youth
that fight.
And it doesn't mean physical war.
I know.
It may be economical, it may be social, and other wars that may happen. And if young people appreciate that, then we shall see change in everything. The best way of change of these bad ideas that are around that affect youth, it is by democracy, whereby we hold our leaders accountable in whatever they are doing. Since we are the biggest
since we're the majority,
the greater many,
and the greater, we can hold them accountable through elections. And if someone is sent there to represent us, then we have the power to bring him back. Also, that one, it has its own challenges we have seen in Africa, whereby youth, like, for example, we have been talking about where we don't have food security, and then someone would come up with money and give the young people 50,000, 10,000, and then they buy them. But if we come together, we can do that.
The coming together is the top equation.
Yes, it is
the organization.
Yes, it is
more like that is the X.
Yes, what I'm saying, I believe in a long term, in a long term moves. I don't think that we can do this today or tomorrow. But as we start, like how we have been doing, things will change.
Things will change.
Things will change.
Mr. Rashad,
and another thing
is a merchant of hope.
Yes, yes. I'm so hopeful. I'm so hopeful that things can change. I cannot say that there is no solution. The solution is always there. And another thing,
very quickly,
we must respect the independence of all arms of the government, whereby the executive takes its actions, whereby the judiciary takes its actions, and whereby the
legislature also does
its job.
Okay.
And once we do that, we shall see young people coming into picture.
Mr. Kidega.
Yes, just quickly. 2 comments from me. One is that each time young people don't have an agenda, they will find themselves running the agenda of others.
That's right.
That is one. 2 is that he mentioned the aspect of elections and democracy. And that's the democracy that we have adopted, electoral democracy. In 2021, there were 18 million registered voters. 11 million of those voters were young people. So you can see that young people had the capacity to influence the outcome of that election at whatever level it was. But also you've asked the question of what can we do? And that question was posed by Frantz Fanon in his book Wretched of the Earth, that every generation has a duty, and an opportunity to identify its mission, but the choice to fulfill it is entirely up to them. I think that what we need to do strategically is begin to break down the strategic bottlenecks that hinder our organization. Right now we find ourselves put in 2 parochial groups. Oh, I am a Catholic, or I am a Muslim, and therefore, you know, I don't believe in certain things.
Convenient.
Or yes, I am in NRM, or you're in FDC, and you know, there are all these small groupings that have been formed for us, and we have gladly jumped into them. All right, now when a young person from NUP meets the other from NRM, they're like, oh, no, those guys, we don't talk to them, and that is very wrong. We need to break that ceiling above us and organize as a generation, because when the roads are bad, when there are no drugs in Mulago, it won't matter whether you're NRM or FDC. When there is an issue of corruption and for some reason our young brothers and sisters cannot have access to education because of the corruption in the UPE or USE schools, it won't matter whether you're NRM or FDC. All right, so the issues affect all of us as a generation. We must find a solution that is partyless, that is tribeless, that has no religion. But as I conclude is on the aspect of the economy, and this is where I think I want to end on. Is that
it is partyless?
Yeah, we can. We must start by believing. But Chris, the last is on the issue of the economy. For as long as the economy is not working, you have a disempowered population. They become gullible to the politicians who offer them 2,000 above soap and things like that. So let's empower the young people, and the rest will fall in place.
Mr. Kidega, many thanks for what should be a wrap for us. I know this particular program cannot be sufficient for us to be able to thresh out everything that we need in understanding what the youth can do, ought to do, and will do in the future. All we have to be are merchants of hope. I'm glad that you are a very good one at that. Mr. Rashande, many thanks. Mr. Byamukama, many thanks. And Mr. Kideka, it's been a pleasure having your perspective. It has emboldened our understanding of matters, and I hope that every youth, especially the leaders out there, including the young ones who have transitioned from youth groups into either parliament, local government and civil service, to be able to stand up and begin to do the things that you ought to do. The ability to do the right thing at the right time is exactly what will condition the kind of social economic change that many of you out there are calling for. It is our time. Maybe our time should have been yesterday, so we are out of time, is what I can say. That's it for this edition of Morning at NTV. It's been a pleasure having your company. I'm Chris again.